There he is.
There.
Hello, hi, John. I'm gonna call the meeting to order. Marnie, let me see, you're regular on here, forgive me. Fred, we're seating you for Walter Tabor. Any changes to the agenda? John?
None on my end.
Let's see, the minutes of April 14th, 2025. Any corrections, modifications, additions? I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as presented.
I'll second.
Any discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
That would be unanimous. Thank you. So this is a continuation of the public hearing from our last meeting for 6 zoning proposed regulation changes. I'll just read through the summary of them as quickly as I can. This is to section 8.5.1, minor home businesses without a permit. Section 6.2, prohibited uses. Section 7.4.5, 7.7, and 21.4.6, structure square footage. Section 21.5.1, agricultural regulations. And section 21.5.4, farm winery regulation. And lastly, section 87.1 and 87.2, soil erosion and sediment control. And we will go into the public hearing mode in just a moment. I just have a comment about the last public hearing. I heard such intelligent, thoughtful, well-supported discussion from the public. It's just hugely helpful. I want to say thank you to all of you. It's just a great way to proceed. We're listening to everything you have to say from whichever perspective you have, and it's really appreciated. And I heard that mentioned by other members that we didn't talk about the content, but just the way it was presented from the public, it was very thoughtful and intelligent. Next, first up, I'm going to just make mention of communication that we've received, and then I'll ask commission members and our town planner and any other member of our staff if there's anything that they'd like to add, then we'll get into a public comment mode. So we do have communication that we've received from Leslie Poulos. And I'm just going to mention by name. I'm not reading the entire communication into the record. Let's see, Beth and Alan Baumert, Bruce and Linda Hopper, David Waite, Ali Wells, we did receive a memo from Mark Walter, and I will mention what the content of that is. I think that's all the communication that I have information on. So the letter was from, I'm going to read the content of the email. The following information is from our assessor to give you facts on what 8 farms qualified for a farm building exempting. Facebook has informed the residents that a $1,500 gross sales will qualify you for the exemption. I corrected the public callers that it is $15,000 in gross sales or $15,000 in expenses. Proof must be shown on a federal income tax return. So that was an attempt to clarify some statements. Actually, it isn't a zoning consideration for us whatsoever. The regulations are what they are. The financial impact, short of a negative impact on the neighborhood, is not something we really take into account as per our responsibility as owners. That being said, anything from members? Any thoughts? Okay, John, anything to add to the public hearing at this point?
No, I'll reserve some thoughts for the end if we get there tonight.
Okay, Savannah?
Hey,
Okay,
yeah, nothing for me either. I'm gonna listen and I'll pitch in if I need to.
okay. Any questions in general about what we're considering tonight, or I see a lot of familiar faces here. Let's assume for a moment that everyone is familiar with the different topics that are subject to the subject of the public hearing. We're gonna be considering each of the proposed regulation changes one at a time at the appropriate time. So I'll open this up to public comment and questions.
I have a question.
Yes,
It's
just for the
perhaps
record,
I did not hear
yeah,
you.
just for the record, if you could. state your
Carmen
name and
Vance,
address.
One Beach Road. Perhaps I didn't hear you. A minute ago, I thought you said that zoning regulation, you did not consider the impact on others.
No, what I said was, we don't consider the financial impact from a tax perspective. So, for example, if we're gonna make a zoning change, the tax impact of that change is not something that's really within the realm of what we consider. We have to take into account the best interests of the community.
Okay. I misunderstood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad you brought it up, though. That's an important clarification. Yes,
Hi, Mary Rifle, 34 Downey. I do have some questions specific to some of the agricultural changes that are being proposed. Is this the right time for?
It
this?
is.
Okay, the first question is, the poultry and small animal categories proposed change have no minimum lot size. That's been reduced from like 1 acre, correct? So does this proposed change apply to all residential agricultural lot sizes, be they conforming or non-conforming?
I'll answer that. Anyone correct me if I'm incorrect. Yes, it does apply to all, as it's proposed, it applies to all residential lots, period.
Yes, thank you. Second question, for the large animal category, the current regulation states a minimum lot size of 3 acres with 1 animal at 2 acres and an additional acre for each additional animal. The proposed lot size remains at 3 acres with no quantity of animals. Should there not be a recommended number of, be it horses, cows, sheep, per acre, or some sort of a limitation or maximum
I can
number?
tell you the thought process there were that there were state regulations that govern that aspect.
Yeah, I can
And we're attempting to not duplicate regulations that exist elsewhere. So it's not that there would be no limitation, it's just that we didn't feel it was needed within the zoning regulations, and Justin, I think, can speak to that better.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So when it comes to, you're kind of half right. So
Okay,
when it comes to, pigs specifically, there's state standards around pigs with minimum acreage standards. There aren't necessarily state minimum standards for other livestock. What there are is best practice recommendations. So what we have within the existing proposal is to, basically keep in any of the conditions that livestock have to be held in, keeping them away from steep slopes, keeping them away from sewage disposal systems, water supplies, anything that negatively impacts the property. So the idea when we talk about livestock is in order for, and it's not unusual, so there's only two towns near us that have a matrix for livestock, like larger livestock, for dedicated space, because that's what we're talking about is dedicated space. Hebron and Mansfield, and one of them is not a matrix for dedicated space, it's a matrix for the whole lot. So like we say 3 acre minimum, they have a matrix for their minimums. So every other town surrounding, and it's not an exhaustive study, but I looked at, and this is just to give you context, and I'm giving you a long answer, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 towns surrounding only give minimum lot sizes. And they require the farmer or the livestock owner to make that determination. So in order, the way that I'm looking at this as far as why I think the proposal is what it is, or the way that I've approached it, is because we would need to have, as a commission in a town, as a zoning enforcement officer, we would need to have to answer this question. If someone has at least the minimum amount of acreage required to have livestock, and they're looking at 3 cows, and they have a 2-year-old Hereford steer, and they have a 6-year-old Guernsey cow in milk, and they have a calf that's 2 months old. How much land dedicated do you need for those 3 animals? We may ask that again later, because it's not a rhetorical question. If we can't answer that, the answer to that is the person who owns them needs to look at all of those conditions and determine that, and this allows them to do that. So that's the process in which we're looking for, which is well within the mainstream of all of the other surrounding towns.
Are there other municipalities that do have? I understood, for example, for horses, Coventry does have 1.5 acres for the first,
Mhm.
and then 1/2 acre for each other horse, as an example.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Coventry. I know Andover is that way. So Andover stays moot on all large livestock except for horses. And you see that in a couple other towns as well. Where yeah, I think what you said is fairly accurate. So horses seem to be one of the bigger concerns when it comes to that. Whereas other livestock, they don't even mention them. And then you'll have towns like Woodstock and Lebanon, who Lebanon only regulates large poultry operations over 200 birds. They don't regulate anything else. And Woodstock it's a true by right town. So they just defer to the USDA and any applicable state recommendations.
Mr. Beck.
Henry Beck, 41 Sleepy Hollow. I'd like to follow up on that, and maybe Jason can give some, what enforcement rights then that exist under the proposal if somebody overcrowds their 3 acres and has 7 or 8 horses on it, even just for the summertime or whatever, and they feel that it's okay, but the neighbors don't.
You know, I defer to you, you used to be town council.
Well, if we had a matrix, then you have something to enforce. If you don't, if you're saying, it's best practices and it's up to the landowner to figure out best practices, then how do you take action in that
Yeah,
case?
it's a good question, and we actually have what we've retained within the regulation. So let's go back to the matrix for a little bit. The matrix isn't practical. It's not what represents good animal husbandry. It's so far beyond what's reasonable that it's difficult to make that argument using the matrix, but we can enforce it in different ways. So let me just read through this really quickly. This is retained. Livestock shall be kept in a minimum dedicated area. So we are mandating a minimum dedicated area, but instead of an arbitrary size, because we don't know unless we're the person who knows the animals and knows their land. We say it has to be appropriately fenced and maintained to contain livestock, located to avoid steep slopes unless improved to avoid heavy surface water runoff, soil erosion, sedimentation, or hazardous conditions for the livestock. Areas of steep slopes can be used for certain agricultural production activities such as grazing if properly maintained, so the soils are not exposed and buffers are used to filter and trap nutrients before they enter surface waters. Located to not negatively impact on-site sewage or water supplies. So this, and you don't have to take my word for it. You can look through surrounding towns regulations. That is far less permissive than most of the towns surrounding us.
How do you
So
enforce that?
we have our town planner's hand up. I think he has something to weigh in on this.
Sure.
John?
Okay, well, yeah, Justin said some of the stuff that I was going to say is that we do retain best practices. So there still is an extraordinarily, it's a high bar to prevent problems for offsite properties and frankly for the owner's own well and septic system and that sort of thing. And in either case, whether you're keeping the regulations as they are, or you're accepting, something like the amendments being proposed, it's still a matter of enforcement. It's either if a neighbor is bound not to like the number of horses in their neighboring property, there's going to be a complaint. It's just a question of what are we enforcing? You could say, all right, they had 3 horses. One of the horses had a foal. Now they have 4. Go crack down, put them in jail because they have 4 horses and they are only allowed to have 3. That's one scenario that's existing right now. The other scenario is, well, they've got 7 horses there. It seems like too many for me. I don't really like horses and I'm the neighbor. Then it becomes, it's not just a matter of counting the number of horses, which is again, an imperfect sort of thing. Because it's subject to change, but you are dealing with actual, scientifically established best practices from the Department of Agriculture to say, I know you don't like the horses, but are they actually creating a problem? Is all the manure being piled right next to your well? Is all the manure being piled right next to a lake, for instance? Are the animals running free, or are they appropriately penned? These are objective standards that will remain in the regulations to determine whether or not something actually is a problem, or it's just in violation of some number we made up.
Yeah, and let me put it this way too, I hate arguments from authority, but I've been involved in agriculture my whole life, so I kind of, let me try to explain it this way. We could have a dedicated space for a horse, and horses consist of everything from a pony to a Clydesdale. You could have 4 ponies on a piece of property and it wouldn't dig up the ground, it wouldn't create sediment runoff, it wouldn't do damage to anyone else's property. But you could have 1 large horse, heavy horse, that creates that zoning enforcement issue. And what I want everybody to understand is that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If you have damage done to your property through heavy animals, and it rips up the soil and it runs off into someone else's lawn where there's excessive manure, or there's all kinds of issues, the number of animals per acre doesn't matter. It depends on the size, the condition of the property, how the animals are kept. And because we've retained this language, that gives, in my opinion, more flexibility than a matrix, because anyone can observe that property and how those animals are kept. And they have a layer from the town zoning, they have a layer from the Department of Agriculture at the state. They have multiple, and even federal, when you get to a certain size of farm, a certain number of animals, especially with manure management, that's managed federally. So I just want everybody to kind of understand that the thought process, it's not zero accountability, zero regulation. And I'm afraid that sometimes that's, yeah.
We have other people with
Right,
questions. Let's circle back if you have more questions. Any other questions from the audience? Barring that, yes, ma'am.
I sort of have
Could you state your name and address the record?
Brenda
please?
Tomlins, I'm at 111 Pine Street.
Hi.
I sort of have a different problem here. I have like a 900-foot driveway, which abuts my neighbor up in back's driveway, who is going to be running a petting zoo up there and all sorts of things going on. I have like a highway next to my home. My home sits like maybe 30 feet off of the driveway. And I have cars going in continually up and down the driveway. Because they have this business up there. It used to be, my neighbor is deceased right now. She had the New England Human Bond situation up there. With therapy dogs and therapy horses. It was to be 5 clients a day. 3 times a week, no weekends.
Just can I clarify, is this an enforcement issue you're bringing up, or is this a comment about our proposed regulation changes?
Well, it is, because I love animals.
Well,
I
as
don't
to which,
care if there's animals up there. It's
No, no,
just
no.
the traffic.
the question I was asking was, is this an enforcement issue you're bringing up? Or is this about our proposed regulation changes? Is it one or the other, or is it both?
Well, it is enforcement, because
Okay,
I don't
that's
know whether
something
the
that
right
I'd rather
meeting,
not address during a public hearing.
but I,
Is an enforcement issue, we have a zoning enforcement agent, please bring that up to that agent directly, you can reach out to her through the building department.
I
would like to
have been to the building department, I have been to
Okay,
this.
I would like to just address the proposed zoning changes here. not more broad-based current situation. This public hearing is about these 6 proposed zoning changes. And that's what we're here to discuss tonight and have a public hearing on. If there's a concern about a zoning enforcement issue, this is not the forum for it at all. And we do have a forum for it, and I respect if you have a concern about something, I want to get it addressed. But there's another forum, and that is our zoning enforcement agent has office hours, and you can address that with the zoning enforcement.
So that's the building department I go to, or?
The building department is where the zoning enforcement agent holds office
I
hours.
have been there and I've
Okay.
submitted pictures of like,
Okay. So but what we're talking about now is the public hearing on the proposed regulation changes,
okay,
okay? Give it a moment, Justin. Yes, so you're welcome to speak on that, but if you have a zoning enforcement issue that you'd like to address in a public hearing on zoning regulation changes, this isn't the place to do it.
okay, I misunderstood this meeting then. I just thought, you know, it would be part of it.
Well, if it is, explain that to us, and our ears are open. But we have 6 proposed regulation changes, and the testimony tonight is on those regulation changes. Or questions that you have about the regulation changes. If you have a concern with the current regulations as they exist, enforcement issue, that should be handled through our administrative staff. Savannah is our zoning enforcement agent, she's online now, and reach out to her.
Yeah, I've reached out to her.
Okay, and we do have a public open comments section. If you have a concern about something, you could bring it up then. But during the public hearing, just testimony on the proposed regulation changes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Karen?
Current Vance, One Beach Road. The problem is, we do not enforce the regulations we have. And I've been around a long time, so I know they don't do that. And I have talked about places in this town where it should be enforced, and it is not. Now you're going to complicate all the regulations and expect that enforcement will just all of a sudden happen, and it will not. So enforcement is tied to the regulation. If things are so complicated, and if you've got some neighbor sitting there with chickens and roosters and sheep and whatever, we can't even enforce the messy yard sort of thing that exists in this town. And I have tried to do that for years. Now, all of a sudden, we're gonna have apparently everywhere, and I'm not sure why, a residential town, which has farms. I'm not opposed to farms, I love farms. All of a sudden, we're gonna turn our residential areas into farming areas and chicken areas and rooster areas and sheep areas and horse areas. It makes no sense to me, and I admit I've come to this late because I've been gone. But they are, if you complicate all of this with all these regulations, they will not get enforced. It just doesn't happen. And why you want to change, and that was one of my questions, why are we at the point we think everybody in this town should be a small farmer or a small agricultural place? It doesn't make sense to me. Maybe you can answer that. So you seem to be the leader of this.
Yeah, no, I can try. I think there's an argument to be made, and I disagree that we're making them more complex. I think it's a lot harder to enforce an arbitrary matrix than it is basic standards that anybody could, you know. I get the enforcement issue, but let's put it this way. Everyone in this room drives by, and I'm not gonna throw anyone under the bus, but we drive by people in town already who are technically out of zoning compliance because of the matrix.
Right,
We would-
nobody's enforced it.
No, that's not the
Nobody's
issue.
enforced it.
That's not the issue. The issue is we would all drive by and say, oh, it's a really nice farm. It's pretty. There's no reason that they would need more fenced in area. And it's because of the absurdity of the matrix. In order to have a few animals, you would need this entire complex fenced in and dedicated to those animals. Or we could say those animals there's too many there. They're ripping up the soil. They're smelly, they're loud, and it doesn't matter how many are there, they're destroying stuff. We can turn them in for that. You could have that same situation where they could be compliant with the matrix and still out of compliance. We're just taking one of those series of levels out. The second piece is, I don't agree with the premise that if we make things easier, all of a sudden, everyone is gonna go out and buy chickens and horses and cows, and it's gonna be a free-for-all. And the reason that we know that is because our regulations are among the most restrictive in all of the surrounding towns in eastern Connecticut.
And what's wrong with that?
Well, it doesn't make
You
it,
know,
I mean, I don't wanna argue what's wrong with it, that's for you guys to
If we
decide,
could-
but.
This isn't a debate as much as it's questions can be put out there, very specific questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. One thing that one statement you made, and I would like to address this, since, we've had our newer zoning enforcement agent, Savannah, the amount of compliance we've gained in town to our regulations has increased phenomenally, and she's done
Thank you.
it,
Whoever she
she's done
is.
it in a masterful, kind, and cooperative way. We have the smallest list of zoning enforcement issues that come before us for review that we've had in my memory. I mean, my memory isn't that great, but it does go fairly far back. So the point is, we are able to enforce our regulations mostly through cooperative and respectful interaction with the public, and being persistent. And it's just a matter of being persistent, and there are different perspectives on the proposed regulation. You have one, Justin has presented his personal perspective about it. And part of the perspective that the subcommittee had when those regulation changes were proposed, that came before the commission for discussion, and then they decided, yes, we're ready to go forward to the public and receive comment, and we're receiving comment. So if the two of you don't agree with the same perspective, let's not make it a debate. Let's just get your testimony on the record. Justin has his perspective on it, and then we'll receive testimony from everybody here. Susan.
Susan Spittle, 35 Samuel Hill Road. This is the third hearing that I've been to on this topic. And tonight is the first time I've heard the term matrix. And I haven't seen anything about the matrix in what's been posted on the PZC.
Our current regulation has a matrix, and we're proposing to go away from it.
And how are you used to?
A chart,
Oh, you're referring to the chart as a matrix?
yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, the way that Justin used it, I thought the matrix referred to something about agricultural practice.
Okay.
And so, but what I don't understand is that we're talking about removing certain restrictions on the number of animals of various breeds on a given amount of land. And is it correct, Justin, that you're arguing that good agricultural practice should result in people will not violate and have many more animals than makes sense? I'm just trying to understand.
Not completely. What, it kind of goes back to my question of determining how many animals can be on a piece of property. So we have to be able to answer the question. I'll make it a really easy one. How much dedicated space do 4 chickens need? How much dedicated space does a horse of a certain breed need? How much dedicated space does a goat of a certain breed need? They're all different. And if we can't answer that, who can? And if we give some minimum standards that, that people have to adhere to, my opinion is that just like most of the other towns around to handle it this way to some extent, that it is up to the livestock owner to make that determination.
So what you're suggesting then is that we shouldn't put any restrictions on the number of, as that's what the new regulation suggests, on the number of various breeds of livestock, but let it be determined by the owner? I mean, I'm just trying to understand.
It's essentially, the answer is yes. The more detailed answer is because we can't answer that question arbitrarily, because there's too many variables. And that's the reason that most towns don't answer that question.
Well, I did look at the regulations for all the surrounding towns, and both Hebron and Lebanon in particular, I know have restrictions on the number.
Okay, we're gonna move,
And there was I had a long list, I still that had a number of towns.
Fred, do you have something?
Yes, just one thing I want to point out is a lot of people are taking this as it's going to be a free for all and we're getting rid of all types of restrictions. What this is doing is, like Justin says, it's bringing it down to the animal owners to practice proper animal husbandry. But there's enforcement action after that. If you're engaged in agriculture for profit, the USDA has an enforcement division with agricultural inspectors. If your animals are causing any type of negative interaction with neighboring properties or the environment, the EP has oversight over it. There is animal welfare investigators with the state. The town animal control officer can be involved. There's multiple overlapping agencies which do enforce animal welfare laws, including some of the public testimony we had about hygiene. The health department will be involved. If your property is causing negative impact to your neighbors, whether it be vermin, odor, bacteria, disease, there's a case for the health department. And the health department will be the agency to come in and do an environmental study or intervene on it. Planning and zoning, we don't do that. If there's concerns about animal welfare, abuse, neglect, too many animals exceeding their carrying capacity, that's where the USDA will come in, or state agricultural inspectors. There's a lot of oversight, state and federal, that would regulate that. What these regulations do is just give you the opportunity to use your land within those regulations.
Yes, Henry?
I appreciate what's being said, that this allows for better fine tuning from the landowner's point of view, but it is still subjective. It's a best practice scenario. And the state can line up its experts, the town can line up its experts, the neighbors can line up their experts, and everybody can have a free-for-all, very costly in court. Whereas an objective standard, and I'm not saying that the overlay was probably too aggressive of protection, and it can be loosened up, but some kind of objective standard as to the finite number of animals or gross weight of animals that you can have on a property allows for much easier enforcement. Everybody knows it's an objective standard. It may not be perfect. It may suddenly roll out one pony, so you might have had 4 under best practices, and you can only have 3. But it, you know, it allows.
Keep the regulation with the current chart.
Well, no, I would suspect that the chart could be liberalized. But having some kind of thing so that you know you got 3 acres, you're only gonna have 1 horse. Or if you have 5 acres, you can have 2 horses or whatever. I don't know, but you know, to have some kind of scenario so that it's more easily enforceable without everybody having to hire an agricultural expert to say and have 10 different opinions on what the best practices is for a particular property.
Mr.
Before
Chairman,
we get to you, yes,
so I just wanted to clarify, there's the agricultural expert, people do not have to hire. If there's a question, that's what the Department of Agriculture is here for. You call the experts there. And they're government employees, they'll come out for free.
Not anymore. It used to be that way. So.
excuse me, please, only speak if you're recognized.
Sorry.
You had your hands up.
No, I was just gonna say that there are experts out there, and I don't think there's many of us in this room that are.
Okay.
James Locke, 24 Doubleday Road.
Okay,
So we're getting comments from people that are not agricultural experts. So who are we to decide what exact number of animals somebody's allowed to have on their property.
Thank you. Nancy,
Nancy Hammerstrom, 5 Oakwood, and I have a letter to submit to the board. I'm just gonna give it to you guys in a minute. From Noreen Newford Farrington. She couldn't be here this evening, but she wanted me to submit this to you. And I just want to add, I think that we need to take a look at this whole thing. I just in response to his comment, I don't think that the folks that are concerned, I'm trying to say what Henry and Carmen are trying, the points they're trying to convey, are worried that if this passes, there's going to be an explosion of agricultural farm animals everywhere, and it's gonna be uncontrollable. I don't picture that happening. I'm not worried about there being a big explosion of everybody in neighborhoods with 3 and 4 cows in their 2-acre front yard of their house and all that. I don't think people are really worried about that. But I think they're concerned, and we would feel comfortable with basically what Henry Beck just stated, that when you have an objective standard, and we can liberalize it. And I think folks that are concerned about this are willing to do that and work with the numbers. But that we're better off having some numbers, because there's always going to be somebody who's going to make a poor decision. And that's what zoning is for in general. We're gonna do this to all our other categories of zoning too. Because we want to give everybody the maximum amount of, who are we to say what anybody's to do on any property regarding anything? You really open up a Pandora's box with that kind of thing. I agree with, I think, Mr. Beck stated it quite well. None of us are anti-agricultural or anti-farming. We all appreciate that here. A lot of us grew up here, and including myself. And one of the things I mentioned in a letter that I submitted is that many years ago, when I grew up here, and when I was in real estate, many of the big farms, there were just the big farms in town. You didn't see a lot of part-time farming that we do now scattered throughout town. There were just the Zegdas and the Robinsons and the big farms. And as times began to change in the 80s and 90s, a lot of the farmers sold off big parcels. And I can remember as a realtor, I would tell clients looking to come into the area, no, be prepared, because you're moving into an agriculture and farming area. Don't move into a big subdivision and say, oh, I don't like the smell. Do something about it. This is who we are as a community. This is the nature of our community. And it's, I would advise people to think about that and consider it. So I don't think any of us are anti-agricultural or anti-farming. We all appreciate it very much, but it's changed now. The big farms are getting smaller, they're going away, and it's becoming a much more widespread community activity. So if it's gonna take place, as Carmen mentioned earlier, throughout neighborhoods, then we need to have some regulations and some parameters. I don't even wanna use the word regulation, but maybe just some parameters and guidelines, some general ones that will protect people in those neighborhoods. We're neighbors, we all live together. We all have to have make some compromise. It's not a bad word, it's not a bad thing. And people are just looking for that and some peace of mind that that's in place. And I'll give you this record. Thank you.
I'm Mary.
Certainly to build on
And
that,
I just want to apologize. I'm supposed to address you by your last names, but I know you all.
Yeah, that's all right. I don't mind.
And we are Columbia.
Hi,
So
Mr. Massey.
I hope you don't mind me being informal. It just,
I'd rather that than other things. Thank you, Rick. I just wanted to kind of build on what was just mentioned here, and I think Carmen addressed it also, and then I have some comments specific to the watershed area. We have gone from, in this proposal, 1 acre for small animals and chickens, 3 acres for hens, to no minimum lot size. It has been stated here that we will allow on non-conforming and conforming property lots. So to Carmen's question, in the residential agricultural area, we are now going to see the ability for small animals and chickens, whether your non-conforming lot is 10,000 square feet up to your conforming lots of 50,000 or more square feet. What are the regulations that are going to be put in place with the non-conforming lots that we have? And I have a map to provide to the, committee of all the non-conforming lots in the town of Columbia. How do you handle the number of chickens or small animals in non-conforming lots versus a conforming lot? I know that there's minimum.
All I can comment is on how the regulation is proposed,
Okay.
not and it's proposed to apply to all residential lots.
It is. Okay.
I can expand on it if you'd like, but.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I don't know what we're going to do, but I know what the proposed regulation change that we're discussing is, and that's the best I can do is explain that.
It seems that we're gonna be reactive in enforcement versus proactive. That we're being more subjective versus objective. And can we have some consensus building where we can have a win-win? Our concern, or my concern, specific to Lake Management Advisory Commission, is the watershed area.
Understood.
The largest number of non-conforming properties in the town of Columbia, the vast majority surround Columbia Lake. If we are going to allow, as an example, chickens on those non-conforming and or conforming lots in the immediate area of the watershed where water drains into the lake, knowing that we have chicken manure as the highest in phosphorus and nitrate nutrients, we face the potential of an unintended consequence of harming the lake. And we've got two character elements in this town. We love our farms, we're farm friendly, and we love our lake. We want to be lake friendly. What is it that we can do that we can have both? If we are going to allow, for example, no minimum size, which impacts the entire watershed area, but in particular LAR, which is right the immediate area by the lake, to have chickens as an example, we are going to face an unintended consequence. I think we know this. What we don't know is, yeah, not everybody's gonna go do it. But what's the unintended consequences? And I don't believe that we have the data yet to understand the unintended consequences of if you do this in a watershed area, particularly closest to the lake, but you can go back 2,000 feet, the intermediate draining into the lake. And perhaps Utley, which is the remote draining into the lake, the three areas that this Planning and Zoning Commission put in place in 2003 to protect the lake for the entire town community, that I think we have to really step back and look at that data.
Okay.
We did recommend, and on tonight's Zoom is Carl Nielsen from PRG, our lake consultant. He is here to address any questions relative to what should that data look like. As you will see, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, there are a number of questions that I don't believe we have the data for yet.
Okay. I'm good.
One final comment. I learned this a long time ago as a young manager. I had a VP tell me once, when I didn't bring something to him that he needed, Mary, in God we trust. Everybody else bring data. Lesson learned.
Thank you. I'm happy.
And Donna, 103 Lakefront. I would like to speak in support of the proposed regulations, because I feel that they are so much better at enforcement than the matrix. And for this reason, if you take two different 1 acre lots, you can still put the same number of chickens or cows or whatever you want in matrix. on those lots. Okay, one is right next to the lake. Okay, I'm gonna put a horse there. Okay, that is so different from a 1 acre lot on West Street with a horse on it. But the matrix will not address that. You understand what I'm saying?
That's a point that's been brought up.
Yeah.
I think we understand that.
And under the proposed regulations, you will be able to address that. You'll say, oh, this horse is too close to the water. The manure is too close to the neighbor. You see, then the same size lot on West Street, it may not be a problem at all. Yet the matrix will not address that.
Thank you. There's the other hands up. Yes, sir.
Jake Block, going toward Doubleday Road. I appreciate the comments that we are our town supports agriculture, but to me, those are merely words, because when you read our town zoning regulations, we are anti-agriculture. Especially when you compare us to the surrounding towns, we appear to be anti-agriculture, but we're not supposed to be. So I would prefer that, we have some of those regulations relaxed. Leave it up to the farmer to make that determination, and if they're being irresponsible, then there are ways to enforce that.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'd look, CJ Pool is 29 Doubleday. I'd like to remind people that not all farmers are created equal. Not all farmers have equal experience. We have kind of gentleman farmers, people who move in more recently decide, oh, I'd like to do some chickens. Eggs are expensive, yada, yada. Then you have people who have done it for a generation, maybe or more, maybe here, maybe elsewhere. Maybe even have actually done college, animal husbandry and or have experience. That's a big difference. And if you took somebody who was in a farming family, second or third generation, how they do things now isn't necessarily how their father or grandfather did things. Okay, as best practices or as safe practices or mindful of the other people. So I think I'd rather see, their matrix, so to speak, have some basic limitations and regulations, to keep people within certain boundaries, because otherwise one person will say, oh, I look at this piece of land and I think I can have, 10 goats here. And another person will look at the same piece of land and say, well, a dozen chickens should be fine. It's just like I said, neither the farmers nor obviously the plots of land are all different, but the farmers are different, practices have changed. And we have people doing, kind of hobby farms as opposed to the professional. So I think still we need some kind of, to keep some regulations in place.
Thank you.
Matrix, something to work off of.
Carmen, you have your hand up.
Carmen Vance, Long Beach Road. I'm very concerned, as I agree with Marion, about the condition of the lake and the water quality. We are fighting continuously to maintain the quality of the lake. It's expensive. We lose ground sometimes, we gain ground sometimes. But we are setting, I'm not likely to go out and buy a horse from my property. My neighbor, I hope, doesn't buy a rooster. If they do, I might shoot that son of a gun in the morning sometime. But we have a huge piece of lake, of
We're
land.
recording this, right?
Yeah.
Camp Astawana, which is owned by people in Hartford. It's been there for years, but it could in fact change hands. And it is a fairly large piece of land. Somebody could turn that into a relatively large farm, not to make a living at it, but to enjoy it. And all of that water and all of that stuff will terminate in the water of the lake. And it will ruin the value of the property that sits there, and I have to admit, I live there, so. But I think that you can't just say everybody can be a farmer, or everybody can have a horse, or everybody can have this. And because somebody buys that Astawana as is, there are a lot of acres out there. And you could have more than you would ever want, given this concept.
To address your concern, if there's that many acres, nothing that under the current regulations, they could have a big farm.
Yeah.
So no, we're not changing anything that would affect us to harm.
Yes.
Then maybe you should.
Yeah, I want to keep this moving. Yes, ma'am.
I have a couple of things to
Your
say,
name for the
Kristen Locke,
record?
24 Doubleday Road.
Hi.
So the first of which being that we have a small hobby farm and it's my husband and I and our children. We can't add millions of animals to our farm because we don't have a full-time staff to care for them. So the idea that people are just gonna be crowding lots with animals when it's a small couple or family is absurd. My kids don't like to do chores now, and it's taking care of a few chickens. It's just unrealistic that the average person is gonna add that many animals to their lot. Never mind around the lake, which some of those properties aren't even occupied full-time. So the idea that they're gonna just put in some livestock with no one there to care for it is also absurd. But in addition to my thoughts, Olivia Evans on Route 87 in town gave me a letter to read. She did email it to John, just before the meeting tonight, but I don't think it got printed out to be put into the record. She asked me to read it. It says, "My name is Olivia Evans and my husband, child, and I are proud residents of Columbia, living right here on the lake. When we chose to purchase our home, it was because we fell in love with the beautiful scenic views and just as importantly with the rich agricultural roots that have shaped this community for generations. It saddens me to hear recent discussions painting chickens and by extension, small sustainable living as a threat to our lake and property values. In an economy where so many families are struggling, we should be focusing on helping one another, supporting local food production and encouraging responsible independent living, not prioritizing extortionate greed or artificially inflated property values. There is little to no credible evidence that a few chickens responsibly raised on private property are polluting the lake. If water quality is truly a concern, we should be taking a much closer look at more significant contributors such as aging septic systems, a much larger and well-documented source of contamination. Let's have honest conversations based on facts, not fear. No one is opening an industrial chicken farm on a lakeside lot. The handful of residents who wish to keep a few chickens are not threatening our community's character. If anything, they are honoring it. Our town has a proud farming heritage that has stood for centuries. That legacy should not be erased because some wish to recreate the lake into an exclusive sterile resort community. Property owners pay steep taxes, and with that, they deserve the right to use and enjoy their land responsibly in ways that align with our town's history and values. I urge all of us to remember what drew us here in the first place, not just the view, but the people, the values, and the spirit of self-reliance and neighborliness that make this community special. Let's be a community, let's support one another, let's honor our roots, not erase them. Sincerely, Olivia Evans, 73 Route 87.
Thank you. Mr. Beck.
Yes, I'd like to speak on my role on LMAC at the moment. As Mary said, we do have Carl Nielsen, the town's consultant, who we pay good money to, and he does a great job of gathering data. We, as LMAC, has already proposed and requested that you hold off on adopting anything in the overlay zone so that we can work together with Mr. Nielsen to study the issue and get the data. We have him here tonight so that if anybody who wants to ask questions to clarify some of these issues can, and so that there can be an understanding, and maybe we can ask him, how long would a study take?
That was gonna be my next question.
And so let's ask him.
What are you looking for a time frame? And hello, thank you for being here. I'm addressing Mr. Nielsen.
Hi, yeah, Carl Nielsen, TRC, Environmental. I've been studying the lake since 2022. And one of the things that we learned early on, we did a model basically of the nutrient loading to the lake. And the lake came in at around 202 kilograms of phosphorus a year. And that was just below the threshold of what it can really manage to handle on its own without excessive algae blooms. So that 240 is sort of the tipping point for it. So it's below the tipping point, which is nice, and that's where you want to be. So our recommendations to the town was to work on reducing stormwater flow to the pond or to the lake. So it not just reducing the flow, but improving the quality of the flow coming in. And so this model that we developed is something that can be built upon and added to take a look at least within the watershed overlay, how changes in land use within that would potentially impact or change water quality in the lake in the future. So we've already done the base of the work that's needed. And then what we would do or propose to do would be to take a look at different scenarios, or what they call sensitivity analysis, where you're looking at if 5% of the current residential properties were to adopt agricultural practices, how would that potentially change the export of nutrients, primarily phosphorus, but nitrogen as well, into the lake? And clearly the further away you are, or the farther away you are from the lake, the less impact that will have. But, you know, we can take a look at that in different if-then scenarios that could predict how those changes would be. And then you folks would be able to make a decision as to whether or not the zoning within the lake watershed would need to be maybe reconsidered or configured differently than for the remainder of the town. So that's what we would propose. I could have that done relatively quickly in probably a month's time.
That was my question.
That was a long answer to a very easy question.
If I might continue, you know, one of the possibilities could be, we come together and we say, adopt it, but require that everybody, in introducing a horse or an animal, it's like building a barn or something, and that you would have to comply with the phosphate overlay zone requirements of making sure that there was no additional phosphate contributed and you had made a 10% improvement on your property. That may be the solution here, but we need Carl to look at it, for us to work together. We also are the feeling that the phosphate requirements need to be looked at again in terms of compliance, mapping and so forth. And so we like to look at it month, maybe 2 or 3 or 6 months, but if we all put our heads together, it'll happen quickly.
And so I might add also, CJ Pool is 29 Doubleday again. The other thing to consider is that there's kind of a romance to farming that I think it's, you know, maybe in people's heads, it sounds like this wonderful thing that's going to, you know, really improve their lives and make them feel more connected to the land and the community. But we have seen, less so with agricultural stock, but with dogs and cats, we have seen how hoarding, all right, how this idea that somebody is going to do something helpful, it's totally out of hand, and all of a sudden they find themselves, you know, underwater with a situation of their own, you know, their own making by not thinking ahead. And again, like I said earlier, not every farmer or person who wants to do some farming, light farming, whatever, you know, is the same. So again, I'd rather see some regulations, some basic, you know, guidelines and restrictions, so that people have an idea, you know, how far they can go with this. Because, you know, I'm sure before too long, we've seen problems with horse hoarding and neglect. I don't know if we've seen it with goats or chickens, but we probably will. Because it's, you know, the idea of small farms around the house, you know, around the neighborhood is picking up steam.
So what you're saying is a very valid concern,
Mhm.
and it's governed by no less than 3 agencies locally.
Mhm.
And those are animal welfare, and animal cruelty, and husbandry laws.
Yes.
So that is addressed, but not by land use laws, but by,
An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, isn't it?
it's also a one-off situation too.
Yeah. We're gonna not debate this, let's just provide our testimony to each other. Yes,
Martha Carter, 34 Downey Road. I have a question and then, I don't know, Rick, if this is the right time
it
to
is.
read
Yes.
these comments into the record. My question is the other, I'm gonna read 2 of them, but the other comments that you've gotten, will they be posted so the rest of us can see them, or they?
Comments?
The
Well,
other letters that you've received.
yeah, they're part of our minutes. They're entire, in their entirety.
Thank you. I'm reading on behalf of people that can't be here tonight. You have the letters, but they've asked me to read them into the
Sure.
record, if you would indulge
Better
me.
you than me.
The first one is from Beth and Al Balmer, 3 Webster Lane. Please reconsider the proposed changes to 21.5 agriculture regarding the acreage required to keep large animals. 1, for 47 years, my husband and I own the equestrian property at 266 Route 87, currently Campania Farm. We had 2 barns, an outdoor and an indoor arena. We usually had about 12 horses. We own 50 acres, but we kept them on about 8 of those acres. Under the current regulations, hypothetically, if we had only owned 8 acres, we would have been allowed 7 horses. However, with good management practices, 12 horses was reasonable. It's possible that the current regulation is too strict. On the other hand, under the proposed changes, do I understand that someone could keep those 12 horses on 3 acres? If I understand correctly, that would guarantee animal abuse and it would guarantee neighbor problems. Agriculture is agriculture and it requires land. If you want to curb agriculture, it needs to be done responsibly. Animals need space, and guess what? They sometimes smell no matter how diligent the farmer is. Some people love the smell, but suburbanites often don't. Decide if you want suburban or agriculture, but don't make suburban regulations and call it agriculture because agriculture requires land. 2, please reconsider all changes that have any chance whatsoever of negatively affecting the health of the lake. I urge you to follow the advice of LMAC and exclude the watershed area from the proposed changes. The second letter is from Bruce and Linda Hopper, 27 Upper Woodland Terrace. Hello, committee members. We strongly object to any aspect of the proposed zoning amendments that potentially adds to the nutrient load imposed on the waters of Columbia Lake. Large and small animal manures are particularly detrimental to watersheds and should not be permitted in the Columbia Lake Watershed A Zone, LA, and discouraged in the Columbia Lake Watershed B Zone, LB.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions from the public?
I think there's a comment in chat. With somebody online.
I don't see anyone with the hand up. There's something on
In
the
the
chat.
chat.
We discussed the lawn fertilizer, which is maturity phosphorus. Most lawns use fertilizer multiple times a year on the lake. Why are we talking about chicken?
Not sure who this is from.
Olivia Evans.
She'd like to speak.
She would like to, she said she can't raise her hand.
I asked Carl to respond to that.
I can offer a comment, sure.
Do we let Olivia speak first?
Olivia, can you hear us?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
There we go.
There you go. No, we kind of looked up the amount of chemicals in lawn fertilizers, and I love it that everybody has a really nice lawn. We also fertilize our lawn, but if the issue is phosphorus and the levels are very high on what the lake can take, then I feel like everybody who is fertilizing their lawn, maybe we should be looking at that because that goes directly into the soil and obviously into the lake. So like septics and then fertilizing lawns. I'm just in my mind, a couple chickens are not like the top of the list, you know?
Just to clarify, you may be under a misimpression. Nearly all lawn fertilizer doesn't have fertilizer in it. I have phosphorus in it any longer. Only starter fertilizer, when you're establishing a new lawn, has fertilizer. I defy you to go to any of the big box stores or to Mackey's and find general lawn fertilizer that has phosphorus in it. So that is a bit of a misnomer that the fertilizer itself, I mean, it's not helpful, the chemicals that are in there, the weed killer and everything that flows into the lake eventually. But phosphorus, it's not a big source of phosphorus at this point. And I'm gonna ask our expert to verify what I just said.
Yep, that's exactly true. And then secondarily on the wastewater systems, the way they're designed, the nitrogen moves through the soil pretty readily, but phosphorus tends to bind to the soil as it moves through. So the phosphorus from your wastewater treatment system doesn't make it to a significant degree to the lake unless there are failing septic systems or faulty septic systems that are, very close to the lake margin, or there's breakouts, and those would become a public health issue, as well as a phosphorus issue. So generally, when we did our initial modeling of the lake, we found 10% of the source of phosphorus to the lake is from the immediate area around the lake. And then the remainder, 90% was storm flow through the tributaries that flow into the lake, storm drains and the main tributaries. So that's really what our focus was, is reducing that stormwater runoff. And that's what you get from improperly managed anything, any land use, not just farms. But if you have residential properties that have dog waste and that dog waste is not picked up, it's a problem to stormwater runoff. Same thing with geese that are allowed to grow, access the lake from shorelines of the lake, and there you get a pound of, or a kilogram of phosphorus per goose per year, which is quite a bit. And the lake can only handle 202 kilograms of phosphorus a year. So if you had 202 geese sitting on the lawn, permanent residents year round, that would be enough to fully load the lake for a year. So that's the sensitivity of the lake. And so when we're talking about trying to protect it, it's not just a couple chickens, it's really trying to look at incremental changes by everyone in the watershed that ultimately are aiding or facilitating the movement of nutrients from the land to the water. And agricultural land can be managed very well, so that there's very little runoff coming from it. But the general practice is not that. Most people don't have the means or the space to create detention ponds or retention ponds that then get emptied properly and pumped out. So the material generally makes its way over time into streams or tributaries that ultimately feed the lake if it's in the lake's watershed. So that's all. And then ultimately the challenge on this will be, if these types of problems occur over time, it incrementally builds the phosphorus that's within the lake itself. The sediment of the lake is a source of returning phosphorus year after year. That phosphorus gets brought up from the bottom to the surface when the lake turns over. So incrementally over time, the lake is going to worsen. And what we're trying to do by reducing the stormwater inputs is trying to slow that process, it's called eutrophication, slow that process of the lake aging and getting more green over time by, one of the prime things people do is land use management or zoning to protect lakes. And so that's why I think the original watershed district was put in place. And if that can be used as a feature for, guiding your decisions here on how to open up agriculture within the town, that would be a smart move, and ultimately save the town money in costs that will be required to maintain good water quality within the lake. There's a number of things we can do after the fact when the lake gets more phosphorus, but those things there's a cost to those. So dredging sediment, removing phosphorus-laden sediment, putting in alum treatments to bind with the phosphorus that's in the lake, copper sulfate treatments to kill the algae, all those things you really would like to avoid, and they add up and they become annual costs because of the annual load of phosphorus. So keeping the phosphorus as low as possible is not just helping people that live around the lake, it's helping everybody in town that uses the lake, and it ultimately is good for the environment as well. Thanks.
Carl, on average, what are the main sources of phosphorus
to the lake? 90% was stormwater.
Okay, but of that 90%, do we know, and this may be a question we don't have an answer to.
Yeah.
Of that 90%, do we know what the phosphorus, where it's generated from of that 90%?
No, because that wasn't part of our modeling. That would be part of what we would propose. So we can actually take a look at what the current land use is within the watershed, how much is residential, how much is forest, how much is wetland, how much is transportation, roads, etc. We take a look at how much phosphorus comes off of each of those different types of land use. Pasture has a different loading than orchards, for instance, even though both are considered agriculture. So we take a look at the current land use, how much phosphorus comes off of each, and then we would look at the residential properties that are in that watershed. And if you were to say make 5% of them now agriculturally supporting properties, how would that change? Because residential loading is different than agricultural loading. And how would it change? So you would then be able to say, okay, well, it's only 2 kilograms of phosphorus a year. We can live with that. But then what if it's 10% of those convert over to agriculture? How much does that affect the lake loading? And so we would be able to do that for you, but it's not at a step that we've done to date. It's it's really a desktop GIS analysis that we would do. We have enough existing baseline data from the lake because we sample there every year to calibrate that modeling so that it would be reasonably accurate and something that you would be able to base a decision on.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
CJ Poulos again, 29AA. Also would like to ask Carl if there are any concerns or if we know anything about bacteria coming in through manure. Obviously, we can't do anything easily about the geese, but chickens, cows, etc. What kind of, do we end up with salmonella, E. coli? What type of bacteria do you see in the lake? I assume you've looked, and
Yep. Well, we're into year 3 of our assessments of the lake, and during last year, we basically found a considerable amount of bacteria coming in from a couple of the drainages, and we've proposed to the town to investigate those this year, and we're waiting for approval to take a look at those, and we'll be able to determine whether it's human or animal waste or what, we can divvy it up, whether it's chicken, goose, cow, sheep, horse, or human. And we do that with DNA analysis of the bacteria that come in. There's certain species or DNA of those bacteria that are endemic to the gut of a cow and not a human. And so we don't personally do that. We send it to a lab that specializes in that type of work, but we would do the collections and the analysis and the reporting of that. And that's in our scope of work waiting to be approved.
Thank you. Anything else? Yes,
I just read
for the record.
Kristen Mock, 24 Doubleday Road. I read Carl's report and it talked about an illegal connection on Ardoni Road to the storm drain. And it mentioned looking into some sort of additional testing to determine the source of that. Has that happened? Is LMAC recommending that to the selectmen or however that works?
Good question.
There's two answers. We are working with Eastern Highlands, our town administrator in Eastern Highlands District, because they are the overseer of the health of the community. Particularly related to septic systems and on lake or elsewhere. Eastern Highlands in the last 6 weeks has conducted an amount of testing. I don't have all the answers yet. We are approved, depending on what Eastern Highlands recommends to the town, that Carl take the next step. The Board of Selectmen did approve that we could do and look into the DNA analysis and understand, is there some sort of connection that could be harmful? So twofold answer, we have to hear from Eastern first, and then Carl is prepared to do that. And the Board of Selectmen have voted for those funding if needed.
When do we expect to hear from Eastern Highlands?
I spoke with him Friday, we should have a report in the next week.
Thank you.
So, yes.
Wendy McDonald on Old Romantic Road. I thought that I appreciate all the comments about the lake and I have those concerns too. I live in a section of Old Romantic Road that are a lot of small lots that are skinny and deep. And they're small and under an acre mostly. So I have some reservations. I mean, I like chickens but I mean, I can greet my neighbors on both sides and across the street from my front stoop to their front stoop and wish them a good day. So I can have a feel for how tolerant, how much tolerance is needed on these kinds of smaller lots that are close together in the way that they're configured, being skinny like they are. I think there could be some difficulties with, and I have nothing against chickens, I like them, but I think that it could be difficult with on a lot that small and in that manner. Thank you.
If there's nothing new, I'm proposing that we consider closing the public hearing, but doing it, going through as a commission, discussing closing each point one at a time. Let me tell you the reason for that. Dave, you brought up, do we have to consider all these at once, or can we consider them individually with different regulations changes to 6? And we can consider them individually, and I'm glad you brought that up, and you did. Thank you. I think that we, with regard to the proposed agricultural regulation change, I think we need more information about that. And I'd like to give the interested parties, the stakeholders, let's call the community a stakeholder, let's call LMAC a stakeholder, the Lake Association, we have an expert working on it. We have a timeline that is realistic to hold off on taking action on the agricultural regulation. So I'm proposing that we go through and work through these, but on the agricultural regulation, keep the public hearing open for the time being, aiming for a time frame of 1 to 2 additional months, likely going to be about 2 months before we take any action on that. And that way we don't have to re-advertise it, and we can collect additional data and let the people that have brought up concerns about it bring facts to bear about it without kicking the regulation to the curb. And I'm not assuming how we would vote on it if we close the public and vote on it tonight. But I think that would be prudent. There's a lot of concern about the lake watershed especially. And if we were to proceed with it, almost certainly I would propose to leave the lake watershed zone out of it and maybe even non-conforming lots. Although that would be a little too broad. And these are just my thoughts. And I would love to hear what the commission has to say about this before we even consider closing the public hearings. So at this point, I'm not gonna formally make a motion to do that, but items 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, 5.5, and 5.6, I make a motion that we, I'm not making a motion, I'm proposing that we move towards closing those public hearings, but simply leave the public hearing open for the agricultural regulations 5.4 until we are able to collect more info with a specific time frame in mind. I would say no more than 2 months, but not committing to that. I would simply continue it. And if there's no new valid testimony 2 weeks from now, we'll simply continue the public hearing to the next meeting and then take it step by step. But if we're on the verge of a lot more data flowing our way to make an intelligent decision about it, especially with regard to the lake water quality, I'm personally all for that. And I don't want to make any assumption that where we're going to go with this as a commission.
So the proposal from LMAC was to pause in the lake overlay. And if we so choose, I mean, it's more complex than just the statement, but go forward with the regulation changes in the rest of the RA zone. So can we accomplish, if we were to do a study, can we accomplish that with the public hearing closed and just use that as a condition?
No.
Could we close the public hearing? Could we amend the regulation to exempt the lake overlay, but vote on the regulation change in the rest of the RA zone as an amendment?
Yes.
We could, it would be really messy. I wouldn't want to do it on the fly tonight. I'd really want to consider the language. The other thing that's been brought up on non-conforming lots in general throughout the town. Do we want to allow it to apply to that? I'm thinking, I'm gonna use my personal example. I live on a small lot across the street from the lake. So if we exempted the lake overlay zone, if we did, that would be one thing. But what if my lot occurred elsewhere in town where it's only about 100 feet wide? And I bought my house knowing that chickens couldn't be on my neighbor's lot. And that's a concern of mine. And if, this is not the commission discussion at this point. It's still, we're in a public hearing. And if you have more to say on it, I would like to hear it. I don't want to leave anything unsaid from the public. So I've listened to a lot of things, and I'm just speaking for myself right now. The concerns about very small lots in very close proximity to a neighbor. That's something else that, and I would be really reluctant to say, okay, now we have 2 separate sets of regulations. One for the lake overlay zone and one for the non-overlay zone. I'd rather take our time to consider the data that's coming in. And I think that there may be some other creative solutions. Henry alluded to saying, well, maybe if a manipulation or a fine tuning is a better way to put it of the nutrient flow regulation is the real answer here, and come up with a really well thought out, really intelligent solution that addresses the concerns we had as a subcommittee about the current regulations based on a chart or a matrix, that they didn't quite serve the agricultural community. And so that's where this regulation proposal came from a deep affection for our agricultural roots, because keep in mind, we don't have an agricultural zone in town. Every zone that's not commercial and mixed use is residential agricultural. We made that distinction when we changed our regulations years ago to get rid of the residential zone and call every place in town residential agricultural, homage to our agricultural roots. And I don't want to take that lightly either. And I'm just speaking for myself. I don't need to take over the conversation, but I think a measured approach here, we put a lot of work and a lot of time as a subcommittee in it. into this, I think that we may come up with a solution that addresses everybody's concern. But I do think we need more time as a commission. I would strongly encourage us to just simply leave the public hearing open for the time being, so that we can get expert testimony addressing what our questions are. I see eventually, almost without certainty, I will probably propose that we exempt the lake overlay zones from these regulation changes, but I don't want to do it haphazard last minute. And I want to keep, and now we're limited as a subcommittee. We can't do a lot of work on this because we're in a public hearing. So we have to do our work in the public view. It was in the public view before, but now we have to keep that work centered within the confines of the public hearing. But I think that we can come up with a really good solution for every interest here. And I do want to make it easier for people to have their small farms, right? But I think deciding on that issue right away would not be well advised. Give me a little more time. I'm gonna open this back up to comments from the public.
Tony Elsie, Oakwood Lane, Columbia. I absolutely applaud your cogent ideas about what to do about these meetings and the open, having everybody know. If you look in this room, there's a few people in this room. People have written letters, people live around the lake. A lot of people don't know anything about what is going on with these regulation changes. I've talked with people that say, oh, really? They have no idea. So we are representing a town of 4,000 people or more. So, or 5,000 people. So we are making a decision about them. That's like saying, let's drill in Yosemite Park, or let's cut down all the trees in the redwood forest. A commission like this can't make that decision unless somebody tries to, but I think that this is not something that should be done now, not 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. It should continue so that it's okay for 5,000 people in this town. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary?
Mary Royal, 34 Downey. Rick, are you proposing that we keep 5.4 open and public and you move forward with the other initiatives?
Yes.
Is that what you're proposing?
Gonna make a decision on the other ones.
May I suggest or make a recommendation? Because non-conforming lots, particularly the vast majority around Columbia Lake, but even as you'll see in the map, in other areas of Columbia, may have some issues with a structure going from 120 square feet to 200 square feet relative to not only maybe nutrient allocation in the watershed, although Carl probably will dismiss that based on our conversations, but neighbor relations. Everybody who lives, as this woman on Old Willimantic, in non-conforming lots, and the vast majority of us do who live on the lake. There are view issues, there are neighbor issues, there are placement issues, even with the supposed setbacks that we have in non-conforming. So I would ask that 5.3 be kept open relative to non-conforming limits. Thank you.
That was part of LMAC's request too.
Yes.
How many non-conforming lots are there that aren't on the lake directly?
Would you like the map?
I'm just curious to know how many properties it affects.
I don't have that data, I just have the map that was provided.
John, do you have a big idea? I know
we had that.
We've had that information.
Yeah, we had it before.
I don't offhand. I'm not sure. I mean, it would mostly be in historic subdivision lots, like some of the older, there'd be some lots like on Brendy Trail and Russmar Trail and Timber Trail, like that off of Pine Street, and then around Wellswood, the Lakewidge, the Wildwood Road properties. But for the most part, certainly the majority would be around the lake. I don't have the numbers offhand.
So I don't think we have an answer to that, but it's obtainable. They can answer your question.
Wendy.
Yes, Fred.
I actually had a question for Carl. So you mentioned that the study would just enable transferring certain properties over to agricultural supporting properties to see what the hypothetical phosphate load would be, correct?
Yeah. Not, I wouldn't pick which ones. I would just do a percentage of them.
Sure, so just to verify accuracy for the outcome, how would you determine if the transfer property per the model would be 4 or 5 chickens versus a cow versus a horse?
The difference isn't, basically, I would be using what's called a land use export coefficient. So the EPA sets those numbers based on whether that agricultural type is livestock versus pasture or crops or orchards. So there's only a few categories to pick from. So there's no distinction between a cow and a chicken. It's just really an average number for adoption. So I would, you know,
Sure.
And then it would just be data for you folks to look at. And you can decide what the value of that is, whether, you know, if you think 50% is probably too many to say, well, half the lots are going to change, I would agree with you. If you would say 25% are going to change, that might be true or not true. And it might change over time, depending on, you know, how successful it is initially, you know, as people say, boy, this is really great. I want chickens just like my neighbor. So I think what we would do is run a couple scenarios for you to look at and then, you know, make those determinations as to how that data impacts the lake and whether that's a change that you're willing to accept.
Any other comments?
I just wanted to clarify that I don't think I live on a non-conforming lot. I just live on a small lot. It's just less than an acre. And the way that it.
Then by definition, it's not conforming.
Yeah. Okay, then, I do live on a non-conforming.
There's a lot of them in town, and I
Yeah.
understand that.
Me, I need. Yeah.
Yes,
James Law, 24 Doubleday. Is there an agricultural commission in town the board's solicited an opinion from, or is it just LMAC that?
everybody's welcome.
But is there one that's been, whose opinion's been solicited?
I don't know that they have the funding that LMAC does through the Board of Selectmen. I don't know enough about it. I don't need to comment on that. Yes, yes, sir, in the back of the room.
Hi, Nick Ferris, 281 Route 66. I am a new member of the Conservation Agriculture Commission here in town. We have a meeting this Thursday. Awesome.
Thank you.
7 o'clock?
Yes,
Yep.
Henry.
LMAC is wanted to work with the agricultural commission when we considered what Carl comes back with. We were hoping to work with you too, but I think if you keep the public meeting open, we probably can't have a joint meeting or something like
Yeah,
that.
we can't do a joint meeting because all testimony has to come through, but I would encourage. Can work with our town planner, and we just can't take testimony outside of a public hearing.
Point of clarification, Mary, would the town planner be able to attend an LMAC meeting?
I don't see any reason why not. John?
Just in terms of scheduling, we could talk about it, sure.
Understood.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just would be very careful. I mean, I've had plenty of people call me on the phone and I've said, I can't discuss it. Because keep the process pure, you know, everything has to come, all the information that we will make a decision on, you also have to have been able to hear. So, here we are.
Do we have an idea how much a study would cost?
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Yeah.
Do we know how the study would cost?
Carl?
Yep. It would be somewhere around 8,000, probably less. It depends on how many hearings and meetings are included.
And where will that funding come from?
Planning so?
Your pocket.
Well, I guess what my concern is, we're talking as though we're assuming that this will take place, and it might take place. But there's practical concerns we need to take into consideration, this cost and time frame. So I'm just trying to figure out if that was the route that we would go. We don't have the authority to spend $8,000 here on a study. So what would the process look like? I guess that's.
It would be, I would likely LMAC going to the Board of Selectmen, asking them to fund the study.
Yeah, yeah.
And they've been very supportive for this kind of, I mean, it's money, from my perspective, it's money well spent. Especially at this stage, I would hope. I'd just say, update us if we decide to continue the public hearing as opposed to closing it. Update us at the next public hearing, where are we in the process, and take it. If this was gonna take 6 months, I would take one perspective, but if we realistically can get this done in 1 to 2 months, I think that that's a reasonable time frame, given all the work that went into crafting the regulation. And almost certainly, I would think we'd consider seriously exempting the lake overlay zone, but I'd want to do it in a way that's somewhat elegant, not creating two big bulky sets of regulations that are side by side. One for the lake overlay zone. Again, go back to what you suggested might be a plausible way of approaching this. Modifying the nutrient allocation plan. That already applies to the lake overlay zone, and it might make for a very elegant solution.
Well, to me, that's as big of a concern as anything, is the nutrient allocation review. My approach coming into this, when we talked about 5.3, would be to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on Lake Road. Speaking as the chairman of the Agricultural and Conservation Commission, before you blithely say, oh, this doesn't apply to certain zones, consider that there are at least 2, probably 3 commercial businesses based on agriculture in the upper Lake Road area, which on the map, on one side of the street is LA Zone A, and on the other side is LA Zone B. There are there's a haying operation, there's a commercial vegetable farm, and there's a horse boarding business. And if you vote to change the regulations to exclude them from
That's what I
agriculture.
said again. I said that the changes would not apply. The current regulations would apply there.
So we're going to have 2.
We don't know what we're going to do, but we were lucky for more time to study it. But in no way did I infer that we were going to prohibit agriculture in the lake overlay zone. No way whatsoever. We already allow it there under our current regulations. These more relaxed regulations for smaller operations. That what I said was that likely that would be something that we could consider as a solution, but it wouldn't be an elegant solution. I think we can come up with a much more pointed and elegant solution that meets everybody's needs. So in no way did I infer or state that we were going to start to prohibit farming in the lake overlay zone. No way did I say that. I never indicated that. Any other comments or thoughts? So at this point, I think LMAC has asked that we not act on the square footage. We just to answer that, and I don't want to speak for the commission. We've really done a lot of research, and this is for sheds and things going up to 200 square feet that are limited in height to 15 feet. So we have 25-foot tall houses that are allowed to be 15 feet from the side yards currently. Now we're saying a 15-foot high shed could be 12.5 feet from the side yard. And if they put a shed in, they have to mitigate the roof flow with crushed stone under it to satisfy our nutrient allocation regulations. Yes, Henry?
Yeah, but we're giving up the 10% improvement that otherwise would be required for a shed that size in the lake overlay zone. And that 10% improvement is, Carl say every increment is important, and that 10% was what was built in
I understand.
in 2003 and has served well to help stem the tide as development takes place. And so if we go to 200, those sheds would not trigger that requirement.
I understand. Yeah, I would want to, yeah, I would not be in favor of holding off action on 5.3. I just think the impact is almost non-existent in the watershed for that extra 80 square feet that is already going to be having roof water going underground. It's
Well, that lends itself to a study very well too, because we're just talking about numbers. So I mean, when you look at a study, 5.3 is really what. I think that will tell a story. For sure.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
I'm saying if we do a study, I'm not opposed. Going from 120 to 200 square feet was just literally in alignment with other regulations. If there needs to be a study because of the percentage difference in that and what, you know, the phosphorus load will be one versus the other, that to me, I'm agreeing with Henry. I think that's an area where we need to, where it would lend itself to a study.
Well, then let me propose that we move forward as a commission and close the public hearings on 5.1, 2,
5.5.
5.5 and 5.6.
Could we get, I don't know if this is appropriate, Rick, but I don't want it to be a foregone conclusion. I'd really be interested in what the other commission members thought about the plan, especially around the agricultural regulations.
Yeah, please.
Sure, I do question the results of any study. Because if it is just an EPA average for agricultural use, that can be weighed extremely heavy versus what the actual use could ultimately be. And $8,000 is a lot of taxpayer money to put this down.
I agree.
What do you think?
I don't know, I'm still kind of kicking all of this around. I think that we've done a lot on the square footage. We just have, okay, I really feel I'm comfortable with that one. I think that the agricultural has to be, looked at a lot more thoroughly. It's just a lot to it, you know, it's, and I think Justin said, you know, but someone said, you know, could be, towers are so different, everything is so different, you know?
I think, my opinion is on. Good.
Rick?
Yeah, Bob?
Yes, I agree with Justin. I think the shed differential or the accessory building differential could be wrapped up into the agricultural study quite easily. So I'm in favor of the study for the agricultural and then include that incremental increase in accessory buildings in that study.
Okay. And on 5.4, would you be in favor of us holding off, closing the public hearing, giving LMAC time to line up the money?
Yes, that's consistent with what LMAC was trying to do.
Okay.
Yes, agreeing to holding off on 5.3 and 5.4.
Okay. So procedurally, I'm gonna go through these and close the public hearings one at a time. So I'll make the motion to close the public hearing on item 5.1, revisions to sections 8.5.1, the minor home businesses without a permit.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. That's unanimous. I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing on section 5.2. The zoning amendment application to revise section 6.2 prohibited uses.
Second.
Yeah, you got beat this time.
Second. Oh, I got it.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's unanimous. I'm gonna make a motion that we continue the public hearings on items 5.3 and 5.4 to our next meeting.
Second,
All those in favor? Aye, I didn't ask for discussion. Was there any discussion?
No.
So who that is, I'm in favor of continuing the public hearing.
Yeah.
Tom? David? Bob?
Yeah.
And those not in favor? So that is Justin, Marty, and Fred were not in favor. The motion passes. I not make a motion to close the public hearing on item 5.5, the revisions section 21.5.4 farm winery regulations.
second,
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, that passes unanimously, and I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing on section 5.6. The zoning amendment application to revise sections 87.1 and 87.2 of the soil erosion and sediment control.
second,
Any discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous, okay, thank you. Okay, anything from the audience of citizens that's not on our agenda? That's it. And
Thank you.
yes, no, thank you. And your questions about the zoning, the enforcement issues, please reach out to Savannah. She'll field your questions, and if you have more questions, bring it up during the public comment, the audience of citizens at one of our meetings, or write us a letter, whatever you need for help. We're here
I
to help.
apologize to Savannah because she's new and probably I was here last,
Yes, she's doing a wonderful job.
so. If you're still around, I apologize if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Savannah, please don't let that go to your head.
Thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate it. But yeah, I am here if you need me. I'm going to be in the office tomorrow, so feel free to stop by.
So under unfinished business, first item 7.1. Minor home businesses without a permit. Any need for discussion to commission? All in favor of it? Bob?
The people on.
So I'll make a motion that we approve section, item 7.1, which was the amendment to revise section 8.5.1 minor home businesses without a permit.
all right, second,
Second, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. The motion passes unanimously. Item 7.2, the zoning amendment application to revise section 6.2 prohibited uses. Can I ask you, can you have quiet, please? To revise section. You please have quiet. If you'd like to talk, please go outside. The zoning amendment application to revise section 6.2 prohibited uses. There's a
second,
motion to approve that. Bob, seconded, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye, unanimous. I'll make a motion that we approve item 7.5, the zoning amendment application to revise section 21.5.4 farm winery regulations.
second,
Fred got that second. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's unanimous. Item 7.6, the zoning amendment to revise sections 87.1 and 87.2, the soil erosion and sediment control. Motion to approve that.
second,
Second by Bob. Any discussion? None. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Next up, plan of conservation and development. What do you need from us tonight, John?
So,
I did-
oh. Sorry, go ahead.
There were some suggestions on the survey questions and things. I hope we all did the survey, the sample survey that we had a link to. It was pretty well set up, but there were a few tweaks. I'm sure you've done those by now.
I have, yep. So I made those changes and we are, because the newsletter, the town newsletter, Columbia Views, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Is coming out, I believe it's coming out next week. So we will have the advertisement for the survey going live, distributed to every household, which is great. And so we'll start to get some input. What I would, and I don't want to take too much additional time tonight. I think what I would propose, because I think we don't have an entirely solid approach on how we want to structure the discussion around the POCD. I think, we want to do this more or less as a committee of the whole and have different stakeholder groups come to planning and zoning. But what I would propose, if it's reasonable, is to convene the regulations subcommittee to just talk about structure of how we want to schedule and roll out the development of the plan of conservation and development. And maybe bring that to next month's meeting as a sort of a scheduled proposal. Just so we can have a little bit of time and space to kind of think through some of the logistics in a small group setting, and then kind of come back to the group and say, this is how we'd like to roll it out, and this is the 12-month schedule for doing so. Does that make sense?
Let me meet with you. You're gonna be in the office on Thursday?
Tomorrow and Thursday, yes.
So let me try to meet with you. I'll connect with you offline, and I'll come in and I'll talk through what we would aim at, so that we can aim at something concrete. And want to do that as part of the regulation change?
I think we should, because one of my concerns is that we've been talking about doing this during the regular meetings and we obviously haven't had time. So I think we should at least have that discussion within the subcommittee. That way we'll be able to have time to focus on it.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll schedule a subcommittee meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
And if Rick, if you're around on Thursday, let's meet.
Okay. We'll aim for a subcommittee meeting the next week, well before our next meeting. Okay, perfect.
Okay, thank you. And for, people who are still there, I don't know if there's anyone still in the audience. When you see the Columbia Views come out, please fill out the survey.
Please. And with just one other thing, John, if you could follow up with somebody from LMAC about their progress on funding with, and I'll I will be also.
Yep.
No new business. No regulation revisions discussed. No any communication and reports. The quarterly newsletter, we don't have to review that, correct? I do want to bring some communication that came to my attention. So apparently we went to the legal seminar online, and I got a bill from the Connecticut Bar Association for attending the seminar. And on the outside of my envelope in big red letters was saying past due. And I don't mind that somebody messed up and didn't record our payment, because I checked with the town, it was paid for in February. I don't mind that somebody made a clerical error, but the idea, the attempted intimidation to let my postman know that I have a past due bill completely frosted me.
I got the same letter.
You got the same one?
Yeah, we all did.
You did.
And these are lawyers doing that to you too.
Well, I was gonna send copies to each of the attorneys that spoke at and this is what your bar association did.
Okay.
So, and they'll get a copy of the envelope and of the letter that's stamped and read past due. So.
Rich Roberts was probably one of the speakers, wasn't he?
Pardon?
Was Rich Roberts one of the speakers?
He was.
Yeah.
He was.
Okay.
Yes, so. You know, I was gonna make an angry phone call and I just said, calm down, let the office handle it. Have they been reached out to verify that?
I believe so, I think I sent you an email with they produced the canceled checks
Okay,
that were sent out.
but was that sent to the bar association? Or are they
I
still
believe so,
chasing
I'll
us?
double check, I know Terry was talking to finance. so
I sent an
check.
email and about 2 hours later, the lady wrote back and said, you're all set, don't worry about it.
I didn't know
Okay.
that. From the bar association, yeah, that's,
Oh,
yeah,
man, that was,
I think they took care of it.
okay, we'll move on from that. Anything in audience of anything else we need to bring up? This is very well done tonight. Thank you, everybody. You know, we don't have to agree on everything, but the way we interact with each other, I really appreciate it. Anything from the audience? Nothing on the executive session. I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? That would be unanimous.
Thank you, Mary Kay.
Thank you, Mark.